event is about to begin. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. The chat is open and we're happy to answer any questions, so feel free to post them in the chat. Welcome to our second live event series presented by Open Minds and CM Michelle, CM Coaching. I just want to say your name, Carla. CM Coaching and Consulting. I'm Alex Petro. I'll be your moderator today. We're joined by Dr. No other than Carla Michelle and Dr. Dale Werner. Working behind the scenes, producing this event is Dr. Kelly Rausch. You see our beautiful pictures up there. 3 beautiful ones at least. We're still with introductions. Dr. Carla, if you don't mind, introducing yourself.
Unmute me. Yes. Hi, I'm Dr. No, it was me. It was on me. Hi, my name is Carla Michelle, and it's such a pleasure and an honor to have this time with you. I thank you for taking out the time to be here with us as we talk about innovation and what's coming. What I do is I am an executive coach. I am the owner of CM Coaching and Consulting, as well as the privilege of working with Open Mind on various levels. And I'm happy to be here today.
Thanks, Carla. Dale, you're up.
Hey, it's good to see everybody again. I'm Dale Werner. I lead Open Mind with my friends and colleagues here. We help organizations think through how to incorporate behavioral principles and behavioral science into their business to make their interactions with their employees and their customers and relatable strategies even more effective. So very glad to be here, and thank you, Alex.
Thanks, Dale. And I'm Alex. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and therapist, as well as sort of heading the research and psychology aspects of Open Mind. That's what we bring to organizations to help them make better decisions. And a special thank you to Kelly, who is going to be in future live events, but working behind the scenes today. So a little bit about innovation. We'll start with some intros, and I'll hammer away questions at these wonderful panelists and see what they have to come up with, maybe add in my perspectives as well. So innovation, right? Our economic situation these days are concerning, with fears of recessions rising. I don't know if we can call it fears anymore. Day by day, I see more and more organizations laying off anywhere between 8 and 60% of employees. So it's hard to avoid that these days. And Dale, Carla, Kelly, Maliana, who's not here today, and I have been talking about how organizations use innovation. And specifically, how are we using innovation to survive? Started out that way. And Dale pointed out an interesting perspective, which is, how about thriving? How about growing as an organization and not just treading water and trying to make it through something as concerning as a recession? So I'd love to start off by pestering Dale with a question about how might we distinguish between organizational versus individual innovation?
Yeah, great question, Alex. An organization is driven by people. It's really how open is the organizational culture to change, how driven is an organization to try to get ahead of risks and challenges that they're facing in the marketplace. And as you mentioned, the difference between innovating to survive and innovating to thrive. Innovation at its most basic concept is facilitating change. Change is going to happen to your organization, to your people, no matter what. So innovation is really driving that change in your organization. So when we think about what's the difference between organizational change or organizational innovation and individual innovation, it really comes down to how are the collective people working together to drive innovation productively within the organization versus a person who is kind of swimming out there solo trying to drive change into an organization but is met with resistance.
Fascinating. Carla, any thoughts on that? And if not, I'll move on to a dear topic of yours, which is optimism and its impact in innovation. But any quick thoughts on sort of the distinction between how an organization might think about innovation and how an individual might think about innovation?
Dell mentioned change, and that is a word that, brings, I think that's how it's viewed, that's how the organization may view and how individual may view change. It's a different concept. It's a different take in. And I think we need to be aware of that as leaders. When we want change, the individual does dissect it a little differently, and to be aware of that. So I know that change is what we need to be innovative and to keep up with what is happening and to keep that lead if that is your goal as an organization. But it is so important to know the difference between the organizational and the individual impact that is happening. So I did want to add that.
Love that. Carla, you have your own practice coaching and consulting with leaders all over different industries. How is change management impacting organizational sort of innovation, and how does optimism play into that?
Oh, optimism plays a key role. One, I believe that when it comes to change management, you have to communicate, and that's a way to keep the optimistic outlook alive. Leaders have to communicate down, and those in the front line or management mid-level have to communicate up. So in order to keep optimism alive, communication is the key.
Okay. Yeah, I've been lucky to work with some Fortune 200 companies, both on the clinician level and more on the IT and business levels. And I find that oftentimes there's this huge disconnect between what a leadership might want, the direction in which the leadership might want to head towards in terms of change management, and where their employees might be in terms of their readiness to change or their willingness to change. And so my perspective has always been, the big guy versus the little guy. The leadership's so disconnected. The leadership doesn't understand what it's like over here in the real world. And so I'd love to kind of point to organizational readiness and the various perspectives towards that readiness and as it pertains to sort of leadership versus employees. And I use versus here purposefully. Dale, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, when I think about, I've seen that dichotomy in a lot of organizations where there seems to be a disconnect between leadership and employees. And sometimes the employees aren't aware of the dynamics that are happening or the competitive threats that are happening against the organization. And again, that comes down to how effectively leaders are communicating and making their case for a particular set of change. Employees, if they are not brought along or they can't connect the changes that are happening in the environment around them or that they're being asked to be a part of with the bigger picture and how that affects not only their organizational effectiveness, but also how that affects the day-to-day work that they do with the customers that they're interacting with or the vendors or suppliers or whoever their upstream or downstream counterparts are within their organizational flow. It feels like something is being thrust upon them. But if people take the time, if leaders take the time to really connect their mission and what they're trying to accomplish to how that affects and improves the day-to-day life of the average employee on the front line, just trying to come in and do the best job that they can for the people that they're serving, it does fall flat. And I think leaders, it's been proven actually in study after study, that leaders believe that they're communicating more effectively than they actually are. And the one rule that I bring back to leaders over and over again is if you feel like you're communicating too much, you're not. Keep communicating more.
Fascinating. Thank you. So let's say that I'm a leader in, let's say in education, for example, and I have a small team of 50 employees, small being relative here. How do I determine whether my organization is ready for change? What am I looking for in this team of 50 people? And how do I keep the channel open while navigating sort of the leader's role? And that's an open question to any of the panelists here.
Yeah, I'll start. So organizational readiness is a tough thing to measure. Organizations have to be ready for change all the time. And this comes down to the idea of your organizational structure being aligned for innovation. Most organizations have in their value statement something along the lines of innovation and being ahead of the curve or being proactive. But the reality is that most organizations don't structurally incorporate the idea of innovation into their organization. They don't have methods for being able to get ideas from across the organization and operationalize them in some sort of continuous improvement methodology. People bring up ideas all the time within an organization, and people eventually stop bringing up ideas because they don't get feedback on, was I heard? Was it incorporated? Whatever happened to that idea? I've been talking about this for years, an employee might say. So it starts with the idea of a culture of innovation within your organization. And that means that you have to align and allocate time for innovation in your organization. Many organizations just really prioritize efficiency and see taking frontline people out of their day-to-day job and helping incorporate them into facilitating change in the organization or capturing ideas or being part of brainstorming sessions. They see that as operationally inefficient. But what that says is that an organization is really not driven culturally towards innovation unless they're really bringing in all levels of the organization. So your original question, Alex, was about organizational readiness. Well, it starts with culture, and it starts with the organization allocating investment in terms of time and dollars into getting people in a room to be able to adopt change. I think organizational readiness is like a muscle that has to be exercised. If an organization regularly adapts and is adaptable by its core nature and is continually bringing in all levels of its organization, it is more adaptable and ready for change. Now, there are assessments and tools that consultancies can bring in to measure whether or not an organization or a team or the culture is open to new experiences, is adaptable, is flexible, or if they're operationally rigid, if they're missing out on information because they tend to avoid information that's presented to them, or if they're stagnant and stuck in an old set of ways and so operationally conditioned to try to drive consistency that they don't really know how to operationalize change. So for me, it starts with culture, and there are ways of measuring that.
Thank you. Carla, what are your thoughts on all of that?
Man, yeah, I was like keeping up with it. On top of to add to, not on top of, but to add to, I think one of the things we have to be keen to is fit. Not are you just ready for change, but is what you're about to do fit, he mentioned culture, fit the culture. And if it does or if it doesn't, regardless of where you're going to go with it, if you choose to not to, that would be great. But if it's something that the company needs to keep up, then, there's training involved. Then are we going to be implementing some change to make sure that they're ready once it's time for it to deploy? Or is there champions put in place that's going to help manage the change that is coming? So it's all that what you can do, but also remembering that if it's not a fit, it's going to take more work. So do what it takes to make sure that everyone involved is prepared to take on what you want to happen. Very
absolutely, Carla. As you were saying that, I was reminded of or memories, I guess, of leaders trying to come up with some change that affected a particular part of a team. And they would often say, oh, well, we can't bring in some frontline folks because they don't have the experience, or they don't have, they're just going to miss the bigger picture. And there were often people on those individual teams that were aligned for the culture and really committed to making the organization better. But leaders had a bias that they weren't going to bring in frontline folks because they weren't sophisticated enough, at least in their mind, to be a part of those conversations. And I always struggled with that concept that there were people that you had hired in your organization that were a perfect fit for what you were trying to accomplish, but they, because of their level in the organization, they were seen as somehow not capable or not ready to be part of the conversation.
Which is too bad. Sorry if I cut you off. Which is too
No,
bad
perfect.
because they need to be at the table, especially if they're impacted and the whole company is impacted. So bring representation, diversify your table to get everybody's input on these next steps. If you're going to do it and they have to buy in anyway, then get buy-in from the beginning. I heard this comment in one of the working with one of my clients, and it was, you can disagree and commit. And that's important. If they're going to disagree, at least get their commitment in. And that's where it starts, is bringing them in at the beginning.
So that leads to an earlier conversation we had about benefits of resisting. Let's go back to the example of me being a leader. I guess I'm just enjoying being a leader in education, but let's go back to that example for just a second. If in my team of 50, 5 of them are just resistant to change, constantly sending me emails about how this is not the right direction, how we need to go back to how it was in the past, and that's, you know, threatening that they're going to quit. I've lost a lot of resources with these employees, the time and effort I put in training them. What's your perspectives? What are your perspectives on those 5 employees that are resisting? How do I fight back against them? How do I get them to commit to my side?
I don't know. I mean, I do know, but wow, you know, those 5 people that, you know,
quite a loaded question.
Yeah, well, you know, we have to be honest. Some people are, it's just changed, like relationships. Just because it's a professional relationship, which working in an organization is, in a personal relationship, you know, if it doesn't fit, you can't force it, you know, so you've got to, someone's got to make some decisions. If they, and usually people do, they make some changes that will work for them, that override what the company's changes are. And that we have that right as individuals, and I mean that we as an individual, and we have that right as a company to understand that everybody will not understand and buy in to change. And that's a part of business. That's part of the world. That's part of life. That's one part of your question.
Okay,
I like that part. I like the answer to that part, at least.
I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, you know, I love resistors to change because they do a couple of things. The first is that somebody who's vocally resistant. There's 2 types of resistors, and Alex, you brought up both. One who is bringing up a lot of concerns, and the type of resistor who says, I don't want to change. Let's go back to the way that we were doing it in the past. The one who says, I don't want to change. Let's go back to doing it the way in the past. I tend to really discount those resistors because really they're resisting change for the sake of, I don't like change. But somebody who says, this is not working, or the thing that we're doing, I'm really concerned about, you have to listen very closely and ask 7 levels of why is somebody bringing up all these things, because sometimes they see risks or they see realities in the day-to-day transactions of a change that are real. And so it's very difficult for leaders to collect and grab that information and make it something productive. So if you can sit down and really ask why after why after why, when somebody's saying, this thing's not working, I'm really nervous about this change, you can usually get to the bottom of it and understand, are they just fearful about the uncertainty, of which you can adjust your messaging to help them see how the path is actually creating less risk in the day-to-day or for the people that they're serving. Or they are bringing up some real genuine concerns, and those things need to be accounted for in your project plan, in your implementation plan, in your change management strategy. So taking those resistors and incorporating them, and not just setting them aside as saying, oh, these folks aren't adding value, they're just being resistant, but actually taking their concerns and then showing them, hey, we've brought your concerns into the communication strategy, into the project plan, and they are making a real difference. Thank you for sharing your concerns. And now that we've addressed all your concerns, how can you still be resistant? And most of the time they won't. But one of my favorite tactics is to find the most positive resistor, the person that is probably the most influential and is committed to the mission in the right way, and making them part of the project plan. And once you bring them into the project team and they feel invested, they bring their resistance, they feel felt, heard, and listened to, and they become your biggest champion, because they weren't just loud to you as a leader, they were loud probably to their whole team. And once they're on the project team and they become a champion, all of a sudden you take advantage of something called the bandwagon effect. And if you think about resistors or people who are facing change, there are probably 25% of your organization that are very pro, and 25% of your organization that might be against a particular change, hypothetically. The middle 50% aren't as committed to one way or the other, and they tend to vote their opinion based on whoever they think is winning that conversation. And once you get a resistor to start becoming an advocate, those bandwagon folks, those 50%, shift into the positive direction, and then all of a sudden you gain a lot of momentum.
Fascinating. And it goes back to, I think, what Carla was talking about earlier, which is how do we make employees part of the conversation, part of the strategy? How do we include them within the part of the culture creation process and the change process? And that makes me think about timelines. When do we start including them? Is it on day one that we're building this culture? Is it throughout the process of continuous, monthly check-ins and monthly, pulse assessments and other kinds of assessments? Or is it, oh, hey, by the way, we're going through a recession or about to, just off the back of a pandemic, so we should probably start thinking about innovation and change. Would you like to join a meeting? I know you're mad at your lack of raise, but come join our meeting and give us your thoughts. Obviously, I'm bringing the cynical perspective because there's so much optimism from Carla that I have to balance it out. But when do we bring employees in, and how do we think about that if it's gone too far? I'll pause there because I can ramble on with 500 more questions.
I was going to say, there has to be some responsibility, one on the leader and the other on the employee. Change happens all the time. I don't know why we're always caught off guard. It happens. I mean, you get hired, and any company you go to, there is change. I remember working for a particular utility. There was change. I was there 5 years. Every year there was change. Either there was a change in leadership, there was a change in departments, there was a change in what someone did, there was a freezing on promotions and increases, freeze in hiring. It just repeats and repeats and repeats. So there is a personal responsibility for the leader as well as the employee to be aware that change is going to happen. And if we lead with that, I believe it gives you some comfort instead of, that offense defense thing. We're always kind of being on the defense. Let's start being on the offense when it comes to innovation, when it comes to change, when it comes to growth, when it comes to pandemic, when it comes to, recession. We're responsible in some way. I just had to say that there's responsibility. You can't always blame the leader. That's what leaders usually get blamed for. But I think if the leader is trustworthy, is communicating, is listening to feedback that they'll, bought out. It's important that, if you're listening to that feedback and you're leading in a way that brings trust and rapport, but it's also some responsibility for everyone to understand that if you are working for someone, or even if you're working for yourself in this day and age, you have to be ready to either be innovative and know what change it takes to be there and stay on top.
I like that framing of accountability on all sides, regardless of sort of title. There needs to be accountability for readiness for change. The reality of the situation is that innovation needs to happen, change has to happen, and will happen whether or not you're ready for it. So how do we get ready for it? And I like your personal accountability sort of framing. And that made me think a little bit about how different today's world is and whether or not it is different. So I'm talking about the pandemic followed by these economic times that are more dire, not more dire than the pandemic. I think the pandemic alone is holding up its own. But are these series of stacked stressors, both on human life and on economic sort of uncertainty, are they different from earlier stressors, or do we need to be unique in our approach? Has technology and globalization impacted the way that we innovate, or is it same old trick, just continue to innovate, bring people into the culture, and you'll be fine? Do we need to change our strategy for innovation to survive the very particular set of circumstances that we're going through? I'd like a 6-page essay on that by the end of the day.
I just want to say the word sensitivity, and I'm going to turn it over to Dale.
Okay. One-word answers are my favorite. Sensitivity, Alex.
I think about a time in our life when, well, not in our life, before our lifetime, about 100 years ago, there was a flu, a global pandemic that was coming off of the end of a world war, and with great technology emerging with flight, with automobiles, and there were 1,000 wagon wheel companies out there, but only one survived all of that, and they are Michelin, and they're around today. The reality is that there was only one company out of about 1,000 wagon wheel companies that survived through that rapid succession of global circumstances and innovative change. But it created opportunities for a lot of other companies to innovate. Mercedes-Benz emerged out of that, a company that I'm sure everyone knows today. The reality is that your company is going to change no matter what. It is either going to change and survive, or change and thrive, or it's going to disappear. It'll become an annals of history, and your company, your organization will be remembered like many of those wagon wheel companies are today. I bet you couldn't name one of them. The reality is that it takes focus and effort and commitment within your organization to be able to outgrow whatever those circumstances are that the world is changing. And the best way to do that is to drive the change and listen to those people who are screaming at the top of their lungs that something needs to change, we need to do something differently. Organizations and leaders do need to take accountability for the fact that they aren't necessarily structurally built, or they don't invest enough resources into capturing the ideas and the thoughts and the innovation that's happening on the front line day to day. Innovation isn't just coming out with some brand new product that's never been seen in the market. It's also looking at how your customer service person might be answering a phone call and can add just a little bit of something different and take the best of what's happening in some of your customer service folks and bringing that across all of your customer service team. So innovation doesn't necessarily have to be big or small, or necessarily have to be big or life-changing. It can be small, and the stack up of those small changes over time can help you weather whatever storm that is brewing on the horizon, or whatever technological changes are happening in the environment around you.
Fascinating. So I want to go back to the wagon wheel example you made. The hundreds, if not more, of wagon wheel companies that didn't make it. What do you think are key elements that you see in those companies back then that you can highlight in companies you've come across today or leaders that you've come across today? What stands out to you in terms of character, in terms of strategy?
Well, I'll go to kind of more current examples. MBA programs are full of case studies where they're looking at Blockbuster or they're looking at Kodak, and the writing was on the wall that the world was changing, and there were leadership teams in place who were just resistant to change. Kodak saying, "Well, we're going to bet our farm on film," is that in hindsight was a big mistake. They just didn't transition to digital soon enough. Or Blockbuster ignoring the streaming, the disruption of streaming within their market against Netflix. They just, the mindset of the old guard sitting at the top of the company was, well, dial-up internet is way too slow, and all they're really doing is sending through mail. Nobody's going to really want to, watch movies that show up in the mail. They're not going to want to wait 3 days. They want to come into our building and, pay penalties for being a day late. So a lot of organizations just miss the writing on the wall, and Kodak and Blockbuster had people inside their organization that were pushing for the changes that could have put them at the head of the curve rather than behind the curve. They were just really bad at listening.
Okay, so can you give me an example of who's bad at listening? Maybe not a name of a company, but what makes an organization bad at listening? Are they just muting out all of the warning signs and historical lessons? Are they too committed to the way that they do things in the past? Or what sort of character are we looking at in a leader that maybe open mind can help with or point out while we're working with an organization? I'll pause there, see if anyone has an answer.
I think as open mind or CM coaching and consulting, there's so many things that we can do as individuals, as a group, as a team, that, it's that open culture. I think Dale was, touching on that a little bit when he talks about Blockbusters and the things, we have to be open to other things happening to a company. And what does that look like? Well, there's collaborations that can happen. There's acquisitions. You can take over, these startups. There's other ways to have innovation without really putting the pressure on your team. Maybe you're trying to acquire it, maybe pressure, but there's things that you can bring in that can help, get that startup, take Open Mind or CM, and buy us. And, help your company, but there's that open culture thinking that you don't always have to be the next big idea. You just got to connect with that smart person that may be outside of your company, that may have an idea that changes and has a trajectory that takes you where you want to go. I know you didn't really say that, but I'm kind of putting it there because there is a way that innovation can happen for an organization when you think about open innovation that can deliver change, that can deliver what's the word I'm thinking? That can deliver the product you're trying to create or deliver the performance you have. I think about the telephone, when it first came out back in the day. I wasn't born yet, but back in the day when the cell phone, not the bail phone, but the cell phone. And you think about it, we were just supposed to call each other. But then there was SMS that came out. That was a collaboration of another innovation that helped now. And who bought that out was the user. The user didn't just want to talk. The younger people, I would include myself, no, and not really. And the texting and the SMS, and that's created something to where now it was an open culture that bought in change and that so many are benefiting from it. And to not just be so close, you asked one of the things, not to be so close-minded of what innovation can look like for a company. And I think that's what, as coaches, we can bring to leadership, we can bring to organizations, to have them look outside of what the norm may be and to see what's out there that we can acquire or we can utilize or we can collaborate with for growth.
Instead of fighting you on that for once, I'm going to agree with you and add to it, especially the sort of varying perspectives. I think a lot of times leaders can get stuck in their ways and use their patterns of behavior to innovate, while ignoring a potential issue like their employees feeling a little bit of burnout. How can employees overcome change fatigue? Can they overcome change fatigue, or do they need to quit and move on to another company that's not as changey? So, word of the day that I'm creating. But yeah, so I think offering different perspectives isn't just helpful for the leaders. It's helpful for employees. How are they sparking innovation and leveraging innovation to make their experience of work better? Are they completely burned out from change because you got to change your schedule? You got to work from home now. Personally, I love that, but you got to change the way you talk and walk, and wear PPE and do all of these various levels of change because of the pandemic. And now we're changing again, people getting laid off, people, taking on more roles, more responsibilities, and getting even more burned out. And then we're asking them to continue to change. So I love your idea of offering different perspectives and leveraging that stress into more innovation. Doesn't always work. I try to live in the real world. And yeah, sometimes too much change can lead to change fatigue, and people that might make an organization as a whole not ready for change. But yeah, Dale, what are your thoughts on Carla or I's perspectives on that?
Yeah, I mean, you brought up a lot of exogenous change, right? Things that are thrust upon an organization, like PPE and having to work from home for the pandemic. But there are a lot of changes that happen within an organization that also feel exogenous, but are actually driven by the organization: a merger, an acquisition, a replacement of a platform is used to interact with your customers, an ERP or a CRM or telephone system, whatever it could be. The reality is that organizations are trying to find ways to adapt and become more competitive or become more digital in a world that is changing really, really rapidly, where preferences of their customers are continually being refined and adapted to, and your competitors might be moving ahead faster than you, and you're trying to figure out even just how to keep the doors open and keep payroll met. The reality is that it takes a group of people really committed to change to want to continue to move forward. And we talk about change burnout, or feeling oversaturated with the amount of change that's happening. And that's because I think a lot of people feel whiplash from change because they're not brought along on the journey effectively, or change is being rushed in its implementation to try to get across some magical finish line. We're going to hit this thing by this date because the budget says we have to hit that date. And then you end up skipping in some areas that are really necessary that could keep people really engaged in the change, or they're missing out on why that piece of change is necessary for them. People will adapt and adopt change all day long if they think it's going to make their life better, if they think that's going to help them in their day-to-day, and they can see and connect what is changing around them with the things that are actually adding value to their day-to-day life. The reality is a lot of change feels thrust upon employees, even ones that are driven by them and are to their own benefit. So I think what organizations do is they again don't open up the coffers open up the kimono and say, here is what we're really trying to solve. I'll say it slightly differently. Organizations are really very effective at communicating all the good that they're doing. But what they don't do is they don't go to their employees and say, we're struggling here, here, and here. We need your ideas. And that is a culture that has to be incorporated into an organization that is open to cultural change and is open to change, to say, look, we're struggling here. Let's use the wisdom of the crowd to see what ideas we can get. And that connects to some research that was done out of Stanford around brainstorming. Most people bring a small group of people in and they brainstorm and they get 5 or 6 ideas, and then they pick one of those ideas to drive the change. The reality is it takes somewhere between 600 and 6,000 ideas to land on one good, productive, effective change. You can't do that by asking a small group of people for 1 hour to come up with a change. But you can do that if you present the problem to your organization and open it up to all of your organization to submit a couple of ideas that might help solve that problem. You might not find the answer, but you will find themes and ideas that can be explored that can lead to the answer.
I absolutely love that. And what a great time in this session to ask our attendees if they have any question. Just a reminder to hop in the chat and send some questions through the Q&A. No pressure there, though. So until then, until I see something pop up.
I said the word sensitivity, and you mentioned employees and burnout, and that's why I said sensitivity, because you know, with the psychotherapy background and what Open Mind is doing with mind loss.
There you go.
That's right, mind loss.
You got it right.
It is it important to remember the aspects of we're human. We're all human, but leaders are taught to be detached. Maybe they're not taught it, but they learn it very well. And your frontline workers are not, they come with their heart, and they come with, you know, expectation. And so sensitivity that's why I threw out that word, is very important. And it's not like you go around crying. It's just sensitive to being emotionally intelligent about the pressures and the impact and the ask that is happening amongst what is already happening in the world. And it's hard to, you know, resilience is a great word that we used in our other chat, but it's something that we all need, and to be able to bounce back during a time like this. And the employees need to have support, you know, and a lot of times, even if all is going on, I know we're offering more of that help, you know, psychotherapy and things like that, but it's very, very key, not just for frontline, but leaders as well, because the pressure is real. So sensitivity, and then to consider, I mean, Dale kind of touched on it a little bit, like, what are you getting out of it, and taking them in and getting their input, and, you know, but where's the reward? What about if we reward employees more for their performance during change? I mean, and I'm talking money, or I'm talking something that, you know, I know people, organizations don't necessarily put out money, but just imagine what kind of buy-in you would get if there was some type of reward that is valued when we talk about change and what is happening in innovation. I just wanted to throw that in.
Yeah, you know, you think it's,
Go ahead.
Yeah, I love that idea. I hadn't thought about that before, Carla, but you know, the reality is that a project budget, a project usually gets approved with some idea that there's going to be a return on that investment of dollars. Why not allocate some of your project savings, and if you can beat the budget, fund a bonus pool for the people that are affected by that change? It's such a real way to put your literal money where your mouth is and say, hey, we're doing this for a real reason. We've got a change bonus because we hit that budget and we hit that timeline, and we're going to realize a better outcome with our customers because you adopted this change more quickly. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, I agree to that. And I also think about something I was talking about earlier, quoting myself here, great. And that's organizational or employees feeling experiences of burnout. When I talk about burnout, I'm thinking about emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and lack of personal accomplishment. all of these are happening in employees. Employees are feeling disconnected from their job, and a sense of resentment, even if it's getting to that point. And what Carla, I think, is talking about will feed and help resolve some of that recharging of their burned out battery, of their limited capacity to give resources from themselves in terms of time, in terms of efforts. If we're working on the personal accomplishment piece with rewards, it can be financial, it can be otherwise, but if we're helping improve that sense of personal accomplishments because there's a reward, I feel more connected to my job. I feel like I don't have to resent it. I feel like I probably be more willing to give to my job because I'm getting recharged in some way. And one of the best ways to recharge, if you told me I was going to get an extra, I don't know, 5% and raise, I think I'd be pretty willing to, give more to my organization. But it's not always about cash. So I want to talk about different ways, if we do have the time, that we can reward employees.
Yeah, the first way for me is, there is a sense of pride in knowing that a change that you helped facilitate or an idea that you had that got incorporated made its way into the real world and that I was listened to as an employee. I often, when people would say, what was it that really defined who you are as a leader or as, in the way that you worked? And my answer has always been, it's always been great to know that a lot of the ideas and the things and the clients that I've helped have left a lasting fingerprint on the way that company does business. The changes that I've helped instill in some organizations still happen today, 10, 15, 20 years later, even though I don't look that old. The reality is that a lot of employees just want to do the right thing for their organization, for their team, and for their customers. And they get immense satisfaction out of knowing and getting recognized for the idea that they brought up an idea and it got implemented. And so being able to track and collect in a meaningful way and evaluate as part of your organizational structure where ideas came from, which ones got implemented, which ones are going to maybe get implemented later. They're on a wait list for when the time is right, so that employees can keep track of all the ideas that they have. And most importantly, they provide a bullet point or a thought process or a consideration when it comes around to the next review time and you're evaluating their performance and they have something that says, hey, this change went into place and my leader recognized that I had a hand in that. That recognition just goes miles. I would even say that recognition is far more important than a bump in cash or a short-term bonus.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to the psychology of the mind. I think, yeah, cash is great, but feeling rewarded in a different way, feeling like what you've done has led to a positive change across, it could be something as small as a team and as big as a country or a national project. I know I've worked on developing an electronic health record, and seeing the piece that I helped develop, cash was great. But seeing the piece being used by thousands of people, that brought me a lot more joy. That brought me a sense of real personal accomplishments. I talked about burnout. Oh, go ahead, Carla.
I want to mention a quote by Dwight Eisenhower. He said, "Leadership is the art of getting someone else to do something you want done because they want to do it." And that's basically what we're saying, is using their ideas because they want to be a part of it. And I wanted another reward is, hey, these are your future leaders here. Many times you see executives bringing in outside executives and outside leaders. And how would it feel to know that an idea was dog-eared that you bought up years ago, and that is why they're considering you for a position? I mean, that's another way that's not cashed out, but it's cashed in eventually.
Fascinating. I love that quote. Dale, I talked a little bit about burnout and my research, and it feels only fair to ask you about information avoidance and how does that play into change? How does that play into innovation?
Well, it gets back to this idea that organizations are sometimes blind. It's not intentional. It's not structurally purposeful. It's a bias. It's something that happens. The reality is that, so let me start by defining what information avoidance is. So information avoidance is a concept where it's a bias in our own psychology that tends to cause us to ignore information that is contrary to our point of view. So if we really believe something, heart of hearts, and somebody brings us true hard evidence that says, you know what, your point of view is incorrect, I might find a way to discount that evidence, that information, that point of view, because it creates something called cognitive dissonance. It doesn't resonate with me, so it must be wrong. This is how there are still flat earthers on YouTube putting out videos that the earth is flat when all the scientific evidence proves that it's not. But they'll bend over backwards to figure out ways to discount all of the reasons that the earth is round and prove that the earth is flat because whatever reason that is. When we're looking at, let's use the Blockbuster example, just because it's kind of easy and a lot of people know it. The reality is that the writing was on the wall that, convenience of being able to order your movies online and have it delivered to your house and then ultimately into streaming, that was presented, but the leaders of Blockbuster just could not visualize how that was actually going to disrupt them. They couldn't believe it because for them the world was flat, and the reality was Netflix was showing that the world was round, and they were tapping into some human behavior that was so outside of their level of comfort that they just couldn't get on board. They eventually tried to do their own streaming thing and their own home delivery thing, but it wasn't invested in because the leaders didn't really believe in it. So the idea of information avoidance, this is a bias that most people have, and whether it's around politics or around a process that they believe or a system that they think is put in place that is really effective, they tend to discount evidence to the contrary, and that might actually cause them to shut down and not hear the people around them trying to give them good advice.
Fascinating. We're just about at the end of our session here, and I want to leave people with a couple of takeaways. Carla, Dale, feel free to add on here. What stood out to me as my wonderful colleagues are discussing innovation, what stood out to me is accountability and just being honest with change being a real process, and that we can avoid, we can ignore, and we can't fight. So be accountable with change. And another one is involving people as part of the change process as early on as we can. I think that's so relevant as it relates to innovation. We're not trying to innovate to survive. We're not just trying to tread water. We're trying to innovate for growth. We're trying to innovate for success. Those are the key things that stood out to me, but I want to leave a little bit of time, maybe, if I'm nice, to Dale and Carla.
Carla, why don't you?
Okay, thank you, Dale. Thank you. I think about all the conversation. I'm going to do the people side of it and just really, not just the people side, but touch on that sensitivity, and touch on that awareness of burnout that you brought up, Alex, and just understanding that we're not machines, and even though it looks like we're being more and more replaced by machines, and that is the goal. However, there's still some human need there, and in the meantime, that sensitivity is important, and that would be one. If we were sitting here, we are sitting here amongst leaders, is to remember the people and to remember to diversify where you gather your information and what is happening and what you need in in your organization, and also to be open to what innovation means for your company, and not just to be in a competitive edge, which we all can be, but just be open to what makes your company work. And it's about collaboration, that a lot of things should be considered of why not come together, and why not grow together, or why not change the world together, or why not answer a question or a need in the open, innovative mindset.
Thanks, Carla. Dale, what do you think people need to take away from here?
Yeah, I think from a leadership perspective, it really is about that culture of change. It is about how leaders can come together and create an environment and invest in hearing the voices across the organization, and really taking time to explore those ideas that are coming in and solicit ideas when there are challenges, to communicate across the organization that ideas are welcome, that we can't implement every idea, but we are listening and we are evolving based on the voices of what we're hearing within our team. That also means that an organization has to be really clever about how they're evaluating their competitors, how they're looking at competitive behaviors, how they're looking at their consumers, and how they're adapting their strategy to resonate with everyone in their organization, so that those changes that are happening are they have a true north. They have a bellwether that everything's being bounced against, that your strategy is what is really communicating the why and why now of any changes that you're having.
Absolutely amazing. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. My name is Dr. Alex Petro. I'm joined today by Doctors Carla Michelle and Dale Werner. Behind the scenes, a special thank you to Dr. Kelly Rauch. Lots of doctors here. Please take some notes mark your calendars when our next sort of live events are. Feel free to reach out to us with any questions or any help bringing behavioral science to your organization. And yeah, thank you so much for joining today. Appreciate your time. Have a good rest of your week.
Thank you.
Thank you.